Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee meeting of Thursday, November 23rd, 2017, our final Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee of the year. So we have quorum. Councillor Hubley is not here, but we have no reason to believe that he won't be here. So declarations of interest. Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes for the meeting of November 2nd, 2017. Carried. Thank you. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed zoning bylaw amendments listed at items 1, 3, and 4 on today's agenda. For the items listed above, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board if Council does not adopt an amendment within 120 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 180 days for an official plan amendment. A comment sheet is available at the door for anyone wishing to make submissions or comments on these amendments. So item number 1 on the agenda is the zoning bylaw amendment for part of 8089 and 8165 Franktown Road. This was deferred from our meeting of last 3 weeks ago, sorry. So we'll come back to that. We have a presentation on that and a couple of speakers. Item number 2 is the draft operating budget for 2018, specific to the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee. We have a presentation and a couple of speakers on that as well, so we'll hold that item. Item 3 is the zoning bylaw amendment for 7771 Snake Island Road. The Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend Council approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for 7771 Snake Island Road to permit instructional facility limited to training and welding use to the entire consolidated property as detailed in document 2, and 2 that we approve the consultation details section of the report. And we just have a minor amendment to that, which I'll ask Councillor DeRuse to put forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just a technical amendment for the zoning bylaw for 771 Snake Island Road, whereas report ACS 2017-PIE-PS-0131 recommended approval of zoning bylaw amendment to permit an instructional facility limited to training in welding, and whereas the applicant desired to expand the permitted use of the instructional facility to also include training in ironworks, and whereas this application is to expand an existing permitted use to the other half of the property, and whereas this motion will result in an amendment to the existing exception which shall affect the whole of the property, be it resolved that staff report be amended as follow. 1, by adding the text "and ironworks" after the word welding in the first recommendation. 2, by replacing document 1 location map with the attached location map, and 3, be replacing document 3 details of recommended zoning with the following: document 2 details of recommended zoning. The proposed change to the City of Ottawa zoning bylaw 2008-250 for 7771 Snake Island Road. 1, the zoning map of bylaw 2008-250 entitled to the City of Ottawa zoning bylaw be amended by rezoning the lands shows as Area A on document 1 from RC1 to RC1 668R, and number 2, amend column 3 of exception 668 or of section 240 rural exceptions by adding the text "and ironworks" after the word welding. Be it further resolved that there is no further notice pursuant to section 3417 of the Planning Act. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question to staff. This motion, just as to why it wasn't a part of the report in the first place. Sorry, just a quick question for staff. No problem. So Lorraine Stevens is here. She's the planner on this file. Yeah, you're good. So yeah, so the question, it's on. So the question is just the motion that's before us today to add this use? How come it's not part of the report in the first place? Just a quick.
It's more of a clarification. When I was writing the report, I did not pick up on that it included ironworks and welding. Okay. Because technically I didn't really know the difference, but it was brought to my attention after I wrote the report that it should include also ironworks. Okay, perfect. So it's just to clarify the report from the original intent. And Christine Enza has a comment as well.
And just to add to that, it's the entire parcel that the exception is being added to with the ironworks, even though originally it was to simply add the additional permitted use to half the parcel. So now it's for the full parcel. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Now we have a speaker on it, Mr. Benjamin. I want to say this says Claire, but if you don't, it's up to you. If you're comfortable with us carrying it, does that say Claire? Okay. Perfect. So on the item. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Carry on the motion, and then also on the report as amended. Carried. Thank you. Item number 4 is a zoning bylaw amendment, an anomaly for 168 Bailey Avenue and part of 1640 and 1641 Bantry Place Bailey Avenues in West Carleton March, and Bantry Place is in the Village of Cars in Rio Goulburn. It's just a minor change as a result of some changes to the floodplain mapping that has been updated recently. So that Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend Council approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 to update the floodplain overlay and area-specific provisions affecting 168 Bailey Avenue and part of 1640, 1641 Bantry Place in accordance with mapping received from the conservation authorities and rezone part of 1640, 1641 Bantry Place from open space to village residential first density subzone A with exception zones XX1R and XX2R as detailed in document 2, and 2, that Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee approve the consultation detail section of this report. So on that item, carried. Item number 5 is the Carp Airport development, the long-awaited Carp. It's an inside joke. It's been on the agenda for the last 16 months, I swear. But now it's finally here. I'm so excited. Area-specific infrastructure recovery charge. The Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend Council approve the area-specific infrastructure charge for the Carp Airport developments to recover capital costs associated with water infrastructure expansion required to accommodate new development as identified in document 1. And 2, approve that all past and future revenue from the Carp and Carp Airport areas specific infrastructure charge be directed to area-specific infrastructure deferral revenue accounts to fund the associated infrastructure. And 2, approve the enactment of a bylaw in the general form attached in document 2. So on that item. Carried. And then item number 6. Item number 6 is Reginald, Simpson, and Wilson Johnston municipal drains, and appointment of an engineer. And the report was to appoint Adam O'Connor as the engineer, but we just have a replacement motion for that, as the city is not exactly rife with municipal drainage engineers, and this one is no longer with the company, so we're going to the old standby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Be it resolved that the report and recommendation be amended to replace Mr. Adam O'Connor, P. Engineer of McIntosh Perry Consulting Engineer Ltd. with Mr. Andy Robinson, Engineer of Robinson Consultant Inc. as the engineer of the record.
Thanks. And that would be to appoint Mr. Robinson under the Drainage Act, under Section 78(1) of the Drainage Act, to inform Council on the current status of the Reginald Municipal Drain, Simpson Municipal Drain, and Wilson Johnston Municipal Drain, and whether one or more of the project listed under Section 78(1.1) is required for the better use, maintenance, or repair of the drainage works or lands or roads. On that item, on the appointment. Thank you. Carried on the amendment, carried on the motion. Thank you. All right. We have a couple motions, but we'll come back to those after items 1 and 2. So we're going to go back to item 1, which is the development application for Franktown Road at 8089 and 8165. So let's get a brief presentation on the on the proposal, which has been around for over 10 years.
Good morning.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm Natalie Prasad. I'm planner for this application of rezoning for the property 8165 Franktown Road and part of 8089 Franktown Road. This property is located between Franktown Road and Copeland Road. It is about 30 hectares in size, and it is separated by the Jock River. And we'll come back to this slide in a moment, but there's the location. This application is associated with the proposed plan of subdivision for residential lots, 19 lots, including the creation of a block or a lot for an existing golf course, as well as a block for to remain as general rural for the purpose of either agricultural uses or a single detached dwelling would be permitted there. Now, this application was scheduled to be heard on November 2nd, but was deferred as we were contacted by the applicant the day before asking for additional lands to be added to the proposed rezoning for the segment that is identified as being rezoned to an open space area, having identified that additional lands would be required for the golf course. As you can see from this line weight here, the dark line on the left side of the screen, it is cutting close to the 6th hole, Mr. Chair, so additional lands would be required to ensure that the golf course would be designed appropriately. And I'll go back to this slide here. You can see in the dashed gray area above Area A, that is the additional land. And so this land is currently subject to the plan of subdivision. It's not new lands to be added. It is subject to that. This is simply to move the line that would have created the block for the general rural area, so that that block is now a little bit smaller, and then the segment that would be remaining as golf course would be slightly larger. And then to the south there, that additional line, that segment there, while not intended to be added for the purpose of the golf course, those to be zoned O1A, that line just follows the river so that it would be more appropriate in the mapping. And back to this. So this is the proposed rezoning. The 19 lots would be rezoned to a rural residential land use zoning, and then the existing golf course would remain as, or be rezoned to open space, and then the general rural would be left for the block that will be remaining after the subdivision. And that is the end. And I'm available for questions.
All right, thank you very much. I know that this file has been around for a few years. One of the biggest challenges that we had with it was the minimum distance separation. It's surrounded by, well, there's developments, Heron Lake Estates to the west, but to the immediate east and south is farmland, and it was the impact of the housing onto the farmland and through that, through the minimum distance separation. And that's, we discussed that at many previous public meetings, but it was determined, the interpretation of the MDS was determined that the use of golf course is actually the same impact as the use of residential. Therefore, the needed separation already existed from the impact from that golf course. So that allows them to come forward with a plan for 19 lots. Originally, I think they were just looking at 26 lots. That's some time ago, though.
Yes, well, there were two other where the block 21 and 20 were remaining. The first original application, to my knowledge, included commercial type uses, but that wouldn't fit.
Yeah, the commercial, I think, was the second iteration, and there was the first one had residential off of Copeland as well. I think there was about 5 lots for Copeland.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, it's, like I said, there's been a lot of changes to this one over the time. So we do have a couple speakers on this, and I'm going to invite them if they'd like to come. William Sample, would you like to come up and speak? He's Mr. Sample is the property owner to the east of the site.
I don't have a lot to add. I still have concerns going forward with problems putting a subdivision that close to the farm. I realize things have changed, but going forward, like, honestly, we start work every day at 3:30 in the morning, every day, 7 days a week. We're making noise every day, and there's nothing worse than constant complaints. And I just feel that we rent the land directly across from where the lots are at Franktown Road. We spread biosolids, we spread manure, and it's just, I'd like it noted that I oppose it. I'm not, that's all I really want. I just think it's, and the drainage is just going to be issues forever. I know it is. The Jock River blows its banks on that parcel of land every single time. That last rainstorm we got, it was the only part of the Jock that was, the water was held up. So to expect to put those houses in there and not have massive problems, it's just seems crazy to myself. But that's really all I wanted to say today.
Right, thanks. I know that just to, I mean, I know we've discussed this before. Agricultural operations are exempt from the noise bylaw. So there is no validity to any complaints that we'd receive if someone wakes up in the morning and complains of, you know, a farming activity at 5 in the morning.
I understand that.
There's no.
I'm the one that I live in that community.
Yeah.
We've been there for forever,
Yeah.
and whether you guys give them validity or not, I'm the one that when I run into these people get the complaints. I hear it's ongoing all the time.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why we no longer permit this type of development because of these impacts. But unfortunately, this application was submitted well before that moratorium was put in place on estate lot development in the rural area. So that's where, I mean, again, this is nothing new. We've talked to this before. Yep. But it definitely is one of the challenges. I understand that for sure. And the drainage, I know that they have to address that. They have to work within the Daddle drain, which is right next to it, tie into that.
Daddle drain's not going to work when the Jock River is so backed up that it's not going to work.
All right.
Anyways, thank you for the time.
No problem. Thank you. And then the next speaker on it is Mr. Greg Winters with Novatech on behalf of the applicants.
Good morning, everybody. For the record, my name is Greg Winters. I'm a senior project manager with Novatech, landscape architecture, engineering, and land use planning. As you've said, Mr. Chair, that this application's been a long time coming. I filed the application back in 2009. And pretty much had a pre-consultation. I think it was probably in 2008 at the time. The most fundamental problem, it's a pretty straightforward country estate subdivision for the most part, but we have been dealing with 3 agricultural operations, 2 of them owned by the samples in the area, and we've been dealing with that as a primary issue because of the lack of clarity that was provided to us through the minimum distance separation guidelines. So even with the old iteration, which I believe was adopted back in 2005, there was always the understanding that there was 2 different types of land uses, a type B and a type A land use. Country estate subdivisions fell within the type B land use. Golf courses fall within that type B land use. They're more sensitive type land uses. As a result of some changes to the new guidelines, which were just recently adopted in March of this year, it provided a great deal of clarity as to how the interpretation should be done when you're asking for a rezoning of land to bring it from a rural residential or from a rural area policy into one of these more sensitive land uses. And what it became apparent to us through provision of some guidance given to us directly from the Ministry of Agricultural and Rural Affairs was that when you're changing from a golf course, which this was zoned previously and was used as a golf course in the O1A zoning on it, to a rural residential zone, that you're essentially going from a type B sensitive land use to another type B sensitive land use. And the guidelines specifically say that when you're in those situations, you're not further increasing the negative situation of putting somebody next door, a sensitive land use next door to an existing agricultural operation. So as a result of that clarification, we were able to proceed with staff and to rezone the property. And so we're here in support of the application today. I'd like to thank the samples. They've been good neighbors throughout this process. They've been very helpful. They allowed us many times on their properties to investigate the barns, to get to the bottom of this, to gain a better understanding of the potential implications. But as a result of the policies, we don't actually have to look at their barns because we don't even have to do an MDS on them. That being said, it doesn't mean that we're not respective of the fact that they are there, that they do operate their facility. There is a 500-meter separation distance as it is, because the golf course, their farm, their principal farm is to what's just to the north on this plan, which is actually due east. And then right across the road on Franktown Road, we have looked at the separation distances, and there's adequate separation. In a sense, they almost met the MDS, even if it was applied in the situation. And additionally, Mr. Chair, we are actually adding some wording to the draft plan conditions that speak to that there's going to be an existing agricultural operation next door. So there's going to be notice on title, and we can continue to work with staff to fine-tune that language as necessary, but it's actually a pretty standard condition that we have to notify those purchasers going forward that they're buying into an area that's going to be active agricultural operations. With respect to Mr. Sample's concerns about drainage, I'd like to assure the committee that we've gone through actually a process with the Conservation Authority. They've reviewed this application, and they've actually issued a cut-fill application for the lots that are subject to the floodplain portions of the Jock River through that section, and we'll continue to work through them as we go into the detailed engineering portion of this file. We're also going to be having to do an update and a review of the drainage along the Dowdle Drain to ensure that there's no issues there when the subdivision gets developed. And again, city staff have already reviewed the technical component of the subdivision application and essentially approved that, and we're now at the stages of finalizing the conditions for draft plan approval. We're good. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Do you have any questions for the delegation? No, thanks. I think you know this. I mean, the MDS, having them both be type B land use, I think is mind-boggling to my sense. But I mean, it is what it is. That's what it says. But clearly, someone who's golfing is less likely to complain about farming activity than someone who lives there. So it's a strange comparison that those two would be treated equally.
If it's any consolation, the one I find is difficult to understand is cemeteries as being a type B land use as well. But it's when people are there and they're yes, dealing with a passing of a loved person. You don't want to introduce those new uses into an area where you're going to be increasing the conflict in the situation. But the conflict already exists as per the guidelines right now. So.
Yeah. We had these conversations through when we did our LEAR review as well. Was this notion that agricultural uses impact anything is really, to my point, agricultural use is the primary use in the rural area, and everything else should come secondary. But all right, thank you for your time on this. And thank you for coming to speak.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions for staff on it? All right. So the reports that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend Council approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for a part of 8089 Franktown Road and 8165 Franktown Road to permit detached dwellings and open space uses as detailed in document 2. And that Agricultural Affairs Committee approved the consultation details section of the report. On that item? Carried. Thank you. And now we're on to the 2018 draft operating budget. So we have a presentation on this as well, which will be done by Leanne Snedden from Planning Department, as well as Alain Gontier.
Mr. Chair, members of committee, thanks very much for allowing us some time on the agenda. We're here to talk about the 2018 budget. ARAC budget actually covers a number of different areas in the organization, so we do have a number of senior management here to be able to answer any questions that you may have today. I am joined by Alain Gontier, and Alain is going to speak to the capital projects, and I'm going to cover off the operating. Isabel Jasmine is also here, our Deputy City Treasurer, so if we have any specific issues with regards to the budget, she's also here to assist us. So I think we'll get right into it. So our operating budget summary here. ARAC is actually covering off 2 operating budgets. The development review budget, so Adam Brown and his team is what this committee supports, as well as the Rural Affairs Office. And Rural Affairs Office, as you know, is under Mr. Smith with the Economic and Long-Term Planning Group. So in terms of the net difference from last year to this year, there's no changes in FTEs. The only change is, I think, a $70,000 difference, and that covers off your typical issues with benefits and any changes to collective agreements and so on. So that there's no real change here for the operating budget. And just this slide just illustrates that we don't have any minimum wage impacts, and I've already mentioned the contract settlements and any increments that staff would be subject to. So that's kind of the highlights for the operating side of the budget. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Gonche, who's really going to be focusing on the capital, and I think this is the more interesting part for you in terms of what's going on in your wards. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'll try to keep it as brief as Leanne. So from a capital perspective, when you look at what falls under ARAC's authority, it totals $11.66 million, so almost $12 million, and that really reflects mainly road-related type of renewals. But what you'll see as part of the presentation, but I'll also indicate, is basically some investments that are covered in other budgets that are also related to the rural sector of the city. So when we look at how the 11.6 million is distributed from a funding perspective, 5.4 is coming from new debt, and 6.25 is coming from is drawing from reserves. And when we look at how we come up with the capital investments, all of the processes are pretty much founded in our comprehensive asset management program. And as you recall, both in June and September, we refreshed basically the comprehensive asset management program, which was approved by council. Overall, we're looking at citywide as 42 billion of assets, and certainly have a big component of those assets, mainly transportation-related assets, in a rural area. And the whole basis around CAM is making sure that basically we're applying the right investments at the right time on the right investments. And this is an area where we're seeing certainly increased interest on the part of other levels of government in terms of ensuring that municipalities are doing proper asset management, and certainly with the work that we've been doing over a number of years, I think we're very well positioned and certainly ahead of the curve. So when we look, and I'll get into a bit more detail in terms of some of the key highlights. There are elements that are beyond roads. Basically, there's over 10 million that's related to the community well system and work being planned at a number of the well systems across the rural area. There's also 11 million related to sewage pumping station upgrades. The renewal and rehabilitation related to municipal drain. Just a clarification on this one, there's actually 825,000 that is in new authority. There's already existing authority, but when you're looking at new authority, it's actually 825, and that's for some of the drainage reports based on new requests. Similar on the acquisition of natural rural areas, 1.4 is actually the total. The new authority is actually 340,000. Right now, the city is working on 4 significant properties in association with the conservation authorities, and that's going to total about $1 million. So at the end of 2018, there's going to be about 440,000 left in that rural acquisition account. So some of the key highlights on the next slide. So again, to the previous point that I made, there's about 11.6 that's related to within ARAC authority. All of those investments have a link to roads and structure. So a big component in terms of rural structures, guide rail renewal, and also the rural road upgrades. But what's important to understand is that there is a significant component of rural investments that are actually that fall in other budgets, and especially the transportation and also in the rate budget. So when we're looking at resurfacing, surface treatment, other integrated work, sidewalk renewal, that totals $21 million. Structures themselves, mainly in terms of culverts, those are basically culverts under 3 meters. We're looking at an $11 million investment in a rural area, and $2.3 million related to buildings and parks in the rural area. So overall, certainly paints a different picture in terms of the investments in the rural area. So just a couple of highlights in terms of those investments, and those are a mix of projects that are either in design or actually in construction. So the first ones, Gordon Murdoch, South Garrow Boundary Road and Cannon Road, or actually fall under the rural road.
Right, that's South Gore. South Gore.
The reading too fast.
The partner to North Gore.
Okay, south.
A lot of people say Gower by accident. I just feel the need to correct you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, yes. And we also have, again, supporting an extensive structures program. A number of investments are for design work to be able to prepare those projects for future construction authority, and we also have Richmond Bridge and Mitch Owens culverts that are proceeding to construction in 2018. I spoke about resurfacing. This is just highlighting a few of the more significant roads in the rural area that are being resurfaced in 2018.
Technical difficulties here. Okay, so just wrapping up one last slide on our operational highlights. While there's no specific paramedic funding for the rural areas, the budget does promise funding for 14 new paramedic positions across the city. And that will have an impact on the rural areas, ensuring that those outside of the urban center do have better access to emergency medical services. And an additional $100,000 in funding for paratranspo services will also be able to help ensure rural residents have access to that service. So that, Mr. Chair, really wraps up our presentation for today. And as I mentioned, we do have a number of senior folks in the room. If we have specific questions, we're here to help.
All right, thank you. Just and to add further clarification, that $100,000 for paratranspo was actually specifically for our transportation partners in the rural area. So it's not money that goes to paratranspo service per se, but it's through agreements that we have with Rural Ottawa Support Services, Western Ottawa Community Resource Center, and Eastern Ottawa Resource Center, and they provide transportation services on paratranspo's behalf. We have not increased that since we provided that money to them since, I think, 2012. So it's been stagnant, that budget. This $100,000 catches us up to a point where we should have been and allows them to provide the service as they continue to increase the level of service that they've been providing, and the demand is going up, but our budget wasn't. So that $100,000 gets them the money they need to keep on providing that service to our residents. So questions? Councillor Deroux, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a quick question for Mr. Gontier. Thank you for...
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, good point. I always go to delegations first. So I'm going to do that first, and then we'll do questions. Sorry about that. So our first delegation is Mr. Ken Holmes. Come on up, Mr. Holmes. I think you have a presentation as well. And Mark looks like he's going to go and get that set up. While we're waiting for that, some have likely noticed that Mr. Dale Harley is not here. He recently ended his time with the National Capital Heavy Construction Association. So he's always come out here, and he's always done a good job of presenting to us, whether it was the road less traveled or A Tale of Two Cities. But I just want to thank, on behalf of the committee, thank Dale for his work with the National Capital Heavy Construction Association. Right, so Mr. Holmes, your mic is good. You have 5 minutes.
I think we're ready. This will be a joint presentation. I have lost control of the mouse. My name is Ken Holmes. I live in West Carleton, and I'll also be making a public delegation to the Transportation Committee on the subject of roads. Next, please. Slide. There we go. How often have you seen a residence with a roof like this? It's a normal reaction by a homeowner to wonder how that homeowner can be so irresponsible as to neglect the routine maintenance of his biggest investment. We are in a somewhat similar situation with our $10 billion inventory of roads investment. For budget 2018, we've got some recent facts and figures from the State of the Infrastructure report and the updated long-range financial plan. The first fact that we're reminded of in these reports is that our roads are in a condition that's far below accepted baseline condition of being in a state of good repair. Indeed, some 75% of the road network is less than a state of good repair, and apparently some 30% of the road network is in a condition that may negatively impact the level of service. This is clearly a failing report card in my estimation. The right-hand chart is the latest OMBI report, and it shows that the condition of Ottawa's roads is the poorest of all 15 reporting cities. We didn't get to this state overnight. It's been a steady decline in the condition of the roads over at least the last decade. The fiscal fundamentals of the situation continue to be embedded in the long-range financial plan. Now, looking at that particular chart, the optimist will focus on the situation 10 years down the line when it looks like the funding is actually meeting the budget requirements. But there's some more critical information contained within that chart. There is an underfunding, a significant underfunding, that will be accumulating over the next decade. That funding gap is illustrated on that chart between the two dotted lines, the black dotted line and the blue dotted line. Next. Based on LRFP 2017, I estimate that there will be an additional, over the next 10 years, accumulated roads maintenance deficit of $125 million. This will be in addition to the hundreds of millions of the existing deficit that we don't seem to be keeping track of. We've been seeing and hearing a lot lately about fake numbers in the press. I'd like to quickly go over some of the key numbers that pertain to our roads renewal funding. I'll refer to the Canadian Infrastructure Report Card, as that was the website that staff recently referred us to. The information there is somewhat similar to what's found on the OMBI. That report card recommends a level of reinvestment of 2% of the replacement value of our roads infrastructure. They state that investing less than 2% will result in a decline in the condition of the roads over a period of time. We are currently funding our roads maintenance at less than half that recommended rate, and less than a third of the rate, a third less than the rate of the average of the other Canadian cities. With this low level of funding, no one should be surprised that our roads are in the deteriorated condition that they are. I'd now like to remind you of some of the real numbers on this slide. Line 1, note that some 15 years ago, staff recommended a funding level of 1.5% of the replacement value. I'm inclined to believe that that number was quite accurate at that time, and it was based on the figures that were readily available from the budgets of the former 11 municipalities. But that funding level of 1.5% has never been met. Looking at line 2.
Sorry to interrupt, just a 30-second warning that you're running.
Sorry?
Just 30 seconds you're running.
Looking at line 2, jumping forward 15 years, that reduction of that 1.5% has been reduced to 1.2%, but the plans are only for about 0.9%. Lines 3 and 4 compare budget 2017 and 2018. The good news is that our budget increased by about $8 million. The bad news is that staff identifies about $41 million deficit that year. Next, please. My recommendation, we really need to see a get well program for our roads. There's no sense talking generalities, no sense looking 10 years down the road. Our roads are falling apart as we wait for funding. The deficit is building up.
All right, thank you for that. Appreciate it. We have a question from Councillor Blais.
Thanks very much, and I appreciate your presentation. I think we all agree that we have to continually work to catch up on roads, which is why we have a long-term plan. Obviously, the gap that you've identified is quite large, but you've also highlighted, and I presume because you believe it to be a negative thing, that there is a deficit. That part of how we're financing is through debt, and so am I right in assuming that you're concerned about the level of debt?
No, I'm not concerned about the debt. The deficit means that is basically unaccomplished road maintenance.
Sure, I apologize. I thought you were referring to debt to finance it. So the gap that you've identified is obviously quite big, and so I guess my question is, do you have a preference as a resident of Ottawa on how that should be financed, a combination of debt, tax increases, or in some areas what would amount to fairly significant decreases in program spending?
My recommendation would be to start from very first principles. In 2004, we did what was called a universal program review, marginally successful. I think that sort of grassroots from the bottom-up process needs to be re-entertained. When I worked with National Defense, they did a program called Program Review, and that was an extremely successful program in that it forced, at the lowest level, everybody to look at what they were doing and what was being funded and what would be the consequences of changing how they were doing it and how it was being funded. I think only by occasionally re-examining to that level of detail will we force the proper discussion on very fundamental issues like priorities. In my estimation, one of the top priorities for the city has to be to protect its investment. We have invested $10+ billion in our infrastructure. We can't afford to have that investment lost. So whether we like car transportation or not, whether we prefer public transportation, is almost immaterial. We have an investment, we need it. We have to protect it. We have to give the funding of maintenance of roads a higher priority.
All right, thank you, Councillor Blais. Councillor Ashantiri.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Holm, for your presentation. I think I'm responsible for some of these numbers to get it to you, so I obviously agree with those numbers in the deficit. But the question is, and I said it in my public meeting, there's some of us thinking if we're going to run again next term, that 2% is unsustainable. Should we increase 1% or 1.5% to be directly for infrastructure and road? Is that something you think you can be able to live with and support?
I think if you present to the public, to the voter, some well thought out options, rather than just saying, would you like, or could you accept a 1%, could you accept a 2%, present perhaps 3 broad options. What's the best that we can do, sticking to the 2%? What has to fall by the wayside, or what can be better accommodated by adjustment of our priorities? That can be one option. Another option could be, if you accept that the the maintenance of our infrastructure is a high priority. Would you be prepared to pay an additional 1 or 2%? And focus the question quite clearly in that area. And I think it certainly would be more saleable if that identified addition to the tax rate were specifically directed to the target area of infrastructure maintenance.
But if I do this, you as a resident, which one of those options you just lay out would you accept? Because you know, as much as we do about the deficit in our road and our infrastructure, I think all of us, we agree this is a priority to us because we have the most massive road in our area and we don't have public transportation. So we don't have to make the case the need. So 1% increase will give us $14 million in the city budget. I'm asking you as a resident, which one of those options would you say, I will go for this option?
Myself, as an individual,
Yes.
I have no team behind me.
No, okay, that's fine.
As a taxpayer,
As a taxpayer.
I would willingly, I would encourage the mayor and council to abandon this idea that 2% cap is workable, because it obviously is not. And yes, I personally would be prepared to pay a 1% increase if it were directed towards the maintenance of the infrastructure.
Thank you. For all the hard work you give me with all those emails, it's worth it now what I hear from you. Thank you.
You have one vote.
Because I do have about 10 emails a week from Mr. Holm, just for the record. So.
And I thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Appreciate it. It's always going to be tough. I mean, these things are always, we had a report, I think Jasmine presented us with the results of the budget tool that we had. We presented a budget tool for everyone across the city to submit whether they wanted to increase spending, decrease spending, status quo on all different files, whether it was roads, water, sewer, parks, police, fire, cultural spending, all these different things. Every single chart was almost the mirror image of each other, in that 80% of respondents said status quo on spending. And it makes it incredibly difficult to go out and suggest more when the people keep on coming back to us and saying we want more, but we don't want to pay more. So you're right. I mean, essentially, you have to have a specific conversation, probably well in advance of a budget, to talk about a dedicated infrastructure fund in order to get people to buy in. But you know that there's people in the city that still won't buy in because we see it all the time. I see it on Twitter every single day. Good old Twitter. Okay, we have another delegation, Grace Thrasher, who is the president of the Manotick Village End Community Association. Thank you, Grace. So you have 5 minutes.
I won't take that long, but thank you. And I don't have a presentation. My apologies. I'm a little less high-tech than Ken is. First off, I just wanted to say thank you very much for including all the rural components in the presentation on the budget. For us in Manotick and the area, obviously those things are very important. I wanted to also thank the staff who work with us on rural affairs and the planning section on a number of files. They've been very helpful in getting a few things done in the village. In reviewing the rural components of the village or the budget, there are many things that are already positive for the village of Manotick and the area, including the improvements to the library, the cycling path that's going to come along, hopefully Mitch Owens from Doug Thompson Pathway. There's been a lot of lobbying for that over the years. The resurfacing of Mitch Owens and Rideau Valley Drive South. And I'm echoing Ken's comments. It's a good start, but there's always more that needs to be done. Certainly Rideau Valley Drive North, as Scott knows. Excuse me, amenities, I apologize, I have a cold. Amenities for the Ivy and Gordon Scharf Park in the village. There's also some local residents who've been actively working to get some of those improvements made, so that's very good news. Beryl Gaffney Park, again, there's an opportunity to expand on that. I know there have been some plans developed for that, and we're looking forward to some public discussion as those things move forward. In the traffic side, because traffic is always a big issue in Manotick, turning lanes at Bankfield and Prince of Wales, good news, because hopefully that will help to alleviate some of the backups that a lot of people experience during rush hour. However, we are hopeful that a roundabout will eventually be the ultimate goal for that intersection. And similarly, the light at First Line and Bankfield, we're also hoping that long term that will be redirected to Prince of Wales with the roundabout there as well. Excuse me. One of the things that we've been hearing a lot more of lately is walkability within the village of Manotick. And with the new developments that are going on with Mahogany at the south end and the new Riverwalk development, it's becoming more and more important for a lot of residents. That's one of the things that I hear most about now, other than traffic volumes, is the need to actually have more sidewalks throughout the village. So I think in the budget that you're working with for sidewalks, that we hope that there will be something in there for Eastman Avenue in particular, because that would be a good connector between the village core and the new Mahogany development. And obviously, continuing the sidewalks down Main Street would help with that as well. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, without question, transportation issues, especially in that area, have been an issue for a long time. I met with staff recently on a number of them. The First Line, Prince of Wales, Bankfield sort of corridor, those items, the roundabouts, which are approved through the environmental assessment that we did for the Greenbank Road realignment, they will find their way into the next iteration of the development charge bylaw, which will allow them to be funded from development charges. And of course, that's been the issue to date, that they aren't funded. So they're plans, but the costs of which are quite significant because of land acquisition needs. So those plans will come forward, but unfortunately, we do need to do some short-term improvements, which you know, and those are in this budget, which is good. We also have some plans for Barnsdale and Prince of Wales, which are also in the budget, and we're looking at potentially a 2019 implementation of a roundabout at Barnsdale and Prince of Wales. So that'll be an improvement for the area as well. With the growth from Barrhaven coming down and impacting the transportation network that we all use from south of Barrhaven as well. So thank you for your time, for coming out here. Any questions for Grace? No. All right, so we're going to go to questions to staff. It's important. I think the reason why we do it this way, with the budget presentation, talking about other committees, the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, we have incredibly broad terms of reference for our committee, but when it comes to the budget, we really only deal with a very, very small portion. You saw the $12 million capital. That is a pittance compared to what the other committees deal with. And on the operating side, it's really just Rural Affairs Office and Rural Development Review on the planning side. So our budget is quite small in that regard. Our budget book is, it's like a small magazine compared to like the epic documents, the legal documents that the other ones seem to feel like. But that's why it's important that we look at those other ones in the presentation. And I think we end up talking about those quite a lot too, because all of our items, whether it's parks, police, all these different things, they all impact the rural area, but they're not focused in that budget. So it's important that we focus on those here, because this is the opportunity for rural residents to come out here and look at those. And I mean, the stormwater fee, of course, was a huge issue for the rural area. That's directly in the rate budget. There's about 6 pages of culvert renewal in the rate budget, and I would say 98% of those culverts are in the rural area. I think the total for those culverts alone are above and beyond whatever we collect from the stormwater fee in the rural area. So you have that direct connection there, but it's hard. We don't always look at it because we focus on things like roads. We don't always look at the culverts, the bridges. I mean, the bridge work that's going on is quite significant as well. So to questions, Councillor Blake.
Thank you very much. I guess my questions are probably for Isabel or for finance. So I don't mind if you stay there, but I think the clerk wants you to have the microphone for the recording. I wouldn't want to make Caitlin upset. Or the YouTube listeners, yes. Hi, Mom. Thank you, Isabel. So Councillor El-Chantiri referenced $14 million per 1%. Is that in the ballpark right now?
It's $15 million this year.
15. Okay. Okay. And so, do you recall? I don't recall. Do you recall what each percentage increase in the citywide rate is per either $100,000 of assessment or the average value, whichever metric you want to use, I'm fine with.
Okay. So in the budget presentation, we had the approximate impact on the bill and the citywide, not including police. Sorry, citywide and police, the 2% change was a $58 increase. So half of that
And
for a 1%.
Based on what's the value, though?
Sorry, the 404,000 is the average.
404 average. So we're talking about 1% is 202 is 26 bucks. So we're talking about $14 per 100,000 of assessment, give or take. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so then I guess, Mr. Gontier, I presume you don't have this information right off the top of your head, so I'm happy to get it before the budget presentation, or perhaps before the Transportation Committee budget, because this is probably more where it's reflective. If you were to say, be provided with, in increments of $15 million, a series of additional revenue, say between $15 million and $60 million, what is the list of projects that could then reasonably be completed within that annual time frame? Obviously, reflective of our physical capacity to do actual work too, I presume. Is that something that's easily pulled together?
Easily is tough to define as to what that would mean. We could certainly pull the information together. The only thing that I would caution is that unless council decides to direct it strictly to roads, if we're looking at additional investments, we're also looking at the additional investments to support all of the city's assets. Sure. Albeit there's a lot of focus on roads, we also have parks, we also have buildings. So we would be applying to come up with basically what would we do with additional funds. We would apply basically the same principles related to how we manage our assets, just with a different emblem.
I would be perfectly happy with the full range of assets, because park rehab and building rehab is just as important as road and sidewalk rehab, at least from my perspective. But it's more the idea of an infrastructure dedication or something along the lines that Councillor El-Chantier was getting at, just to better understand what the impact is per 1% of additional assessment, which, if the math is right, is about $13 per $100,000 of assessed value, give or take. That would be helpful.
Yeah. So
Isabel, if you could clarify exactly what that impact would be per $100,000 of assessment, that'd be great.
And what we will do is we would link it to the information that we've already provided to council in terms of, as part of the long-range financial plan, in terms of here's the level that we're trying to achieve. The additional funding will allow us to get there.
I think, to the gentleman's point, I don't recall his name at the moment, but it's difficult to say we're gonna charge you another $30 and it's gonna raise $30 million and it's gonna be spent on roads and parks and buildings, versus saying we're gonna do those things, and for your $30, by the way, the road over here specifically is gonna get fixed, and your park is gonna get fixed, and Scott's Rec Center is gonna get fixed, and all the other, the actual specific things that we would spend the money on. I know that's how I do it at home most of the time. If I'm gonna spend more money on something, it's on something specific and not general. And I think it's certainly easier for me to convince my wife of that, and it's probably easier for us to convince our voters of that if we know exactly what the money is going to go into. I had a heart attack too, and that helped a lot with that argument.
Yeah, it's $11.
It's $11 per 100,000. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor DeRuse.
I got a couple of questions. One of them, probably I'll go back to Alain and ask him. I know this year we have a challenge with the weather. We have a late start in the construction, and we have the cold came so fast, and we have lots of projects that probably we're gonna postpone till next year. And I had this conversation, and with the budget, the positive budget that we're seeing, and we have increased more in infrastructure for roads and maintenance, and especially culvert. And I know you can't anticipate weather, but you think you're going to be able to achieve most of the project that, I mean, because we're behind in construction this year, and with the load they're going to have next year, do you have a plan in making sure that all these projects will be completed in 2018?
Sure. Yes, the short answer is yes. And every year we tend to deliver a large portion of the projects that are approved through the budget process. No different this year. We still delivered basically the vast majority of the projects that we had planned this year, recognizing that we had a late start because we had an extended winter, so seasonal load restrictions only got lifted at the end of May instead of mid-May. We had rain pretty much every second day that we needed to contend with, and we had an early winter. But despite that, the vast majority of the projects have been delivered. And having the ability to be able to predict what the funding levels are going to be so that we can put plans in place allows us to increase basically our degree of being successful. The challenge that we had this year is introducing additional funding midway through the year increases the challenge of being able to deliver, just because basically we still need to be able to ramp up with the industry to deliver those additional projects.
From those additional projects that we anticipate, how many projects is going to be pushed till next year? From the additional funding, that the situation that when we approve in July, how many projects or how many road will be pushed till next year?
I think overall, my memory serves me correct, and I could follow that to confirm. I think there's 4 or 5 that are being extended from that additional list that are being extended.
Will you be able to provide me that list, please?
Yeah, and we've already been communicating with the affected ward councillors as to projects that will not be completed and the reason why and when they will be undertaken.
I appreciate that, but I like to have that list specifically for the additional funding and the project that haven't been done this year. They're moved to next year. My other question will be probably for Mrs. Isabel. Thank you very much. Will you be able to provide? Probably the whole committee would love to see it. Can you send us how much money you collected from the stormwater in 17 and 18, and how much money also spent in rural infrastructure for culvert and whatnot from that envelope? Thank you.
Sorry, you realized you were done there. Councillor Chantieri?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Alain, if I can go back to, we're not tag team and Councillor Blaine and I on you this morning, but you always provide us with a list, like, you know, if we have that much money, those roads will be on this list or those infrastructure will be done. And obviously, when we are having deficit because we're not having enough funding for those, that's the list we like to have the option. If we, you know, if you have that much money, those roads will be done this year versus waiting another year or two. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for to show value for money, basically, and have the people, you know, this is an option if you would like to see.
Yeah, and Chair, if you look even at the current budget, especially for resurfacing, and as an example, it provides a couple pages of projects that are anticipated to be funding by the current program, but it also has basically projects that we call below the line. And the below the line is basically if there's additional capacity, either through additional funding or we're getting more competitive prices, those are the ones that we would be looking at in terms of advancing as part of the program. So that already gives you a sense in terms of if there was more money, what else would we be able to deliver? That forms part of that list. And we have other programs also. Culverts is an example where we also have a below the line program.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. And just if I could just give a direction that if you do go below the line, that you only fund projects with the number 21 next to it, that'd be appreciated. I'm sure we'll just agree that that's the way we're going to go forward, and we won't even talk about it any further. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, my colleagues. You're just tremendously supportive of all infrastructure projects in my ward and none in anyone else's.
I believe as a chair, you have to, as a chair of the committee, you have to treat all your kids equally, sir.
Overruled. Thank you. Any other questions for staff? I just had one, if no one else does it. Just if you could just clarify, there's been some comments recently about winter maintenance, and that we're obviously budgeting more than we have in the past 6 years. Every single year we budgeted more, but then we also spend more. So the optics are that we're budgeting less than what we spent in previous years. Now, of course, it's all based on the type of winter we get. Ideally, we get no snow, and then we're going to spend less this year. But if you could just explain why we don't budget to how much we spent the year before.
It's all related to overtaxation. Like if we actually think that we're going to have a really bad year in, let's say we think we're going to have a bad snowstorm in 2019, we're going to add another 10 million. Well, we'd have to collect that in taxes. And so what we're trying to do is smooth it over time. And we have fluctuations year over year and we manage it. So we're slowly, gradually increasing that budget, but we can't do it all in one shot. And we have been putting more money aside because there has been an increasing trend.
And do we increase it with assessment growth too? So as assessment growth comes online, conceivably that assessment growth should pay for new roads that come online as well. Or is that being increased along that same line?
So every year we increase by the 2%, and then there's also the 1.3% for growth is included.
Oh. Councillor Blais, I've triggered a question in his mind.
Thank you very much. So I'm wondering then, if 1.3% growth, I don't recall there being actual growth in the snow clearing budget. It's all been inflationary increases. We haven't. I don't believe. I can stand to be corrected, but I don't believe we've bought more machines or put more machines into service. So, what's the growth being spent on?
So we'll just have Kevin Wiley come up. Kevin Wiley is, of course, the General Manager of Public Works and Environmental Services. I forget that. I don't want to forget that.
Chair, as identified and I'll go into this more in the TRC meeting, as identified in the KPMG report we did of 2 years ago, we were facing a base budget issue. So the increases we've had that Ms. Jasmine just mentioned over the last couple of years have been basically building that base budget back up to where it should have been so that we aren't year over year getting these regular deficits. We are looking at
It's fine. That wasn't my question, and so I appreciate this is not the same committee as Transportation, so I would encourage you to have an answer to my question at Transportation Committee. If we're collecting for growth, if tax roll is going up by 1.3 this year, 1.9 last year, whatever growth has been over, say, since 2015, how have we added to our capacity? Because growth is meant to add capacity to service the growth, not to cover off inflationary or other cost increases that are not covered by the tax increase.
Correct, Chair. And so I was going to continue with the growth's been managed through the increased hiring of contractors, and that's how we've been managing the growth to date.
Sure. Okay, so there are more, and when you say contractor, is that, I know what a contractor is, but is the increase in we're paying Scott for 14 hours instead of 12 hours, or are we paying Scott and his buddy Joe for 12 hours?
Perhaps what I can do is give you a more fulsome answer prior to TRC committee. Thank you, Chair.
I'm all for getting more money, so if you want to pay me more to plow your road. All right, so thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Wiley, for coming up and answering that. And we look forward to more information in the lead up to Transportation Committee, which, I don't know, is next week, 2 weeks from now. All right, any other questions? Comments from Councillor Durs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a comment. I'm just going to comment to Alain and his group and the team of the contractor that you hire throughout the summer and to complete our project in our community. I know probably you don't hear that much, but it's nice that at the end of the year we're wrapping up to 2018. I just want to give you a little bit positive feedback we received from our community this year. I know in my community with the rain and we have a challenge with the weather, but your project management team and the contractor that you've been working with, in specific my community, it's been tremendous help. They've been accommodating. I know they've been working even at night right now on Stagecoach and Mitch Owens, and the feedback we're receiving from the resident, and specifically in Victoria, when we did the paving for Coco paving, most of the laneway, they were raised up because we did a double layer and in old in the township time, they only did one layer, so it raises most of the laneway. So they were going back and fixing and addressing all the issue with the residents. So I just want to make sure that I address this on a public, leave it on a public, so you'll understand and know that we really appreciate all the hard work from your team this year.
Sure, I really appreciate the feedback, and I'll make sure to bring that back to the team.
Thank you. So now I'll ask Councillor Roos to read the motion, the roadmap motion for the 2018 budgets.
That the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommended that Council, sitting as a committee of the whole, approve the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee 2018 draft operating and capital budget as follows. 1. Development review process, rural operating resource requirement, page 4.
So on number 1.
Okay.
Great.
2. Rural Affairs Office operating resource requirement, page 5.
On number 2.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you.
Number 3. The Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee capital program, page 6. Individual project listed, page 14 to 25.
And on number 3.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you very much. So that the Agricultural Affairs Committee, so on the budget, our whole budget as a whole, is that carried? Carried. Thanks. Instead of reading the whole words. All right. So what we have now is we have a couple of motions that we'll be putting forward. Councillor Roos has one, and then I have one. So I'm going to hand off. I'm going to allow Councillor Roos to move his motion. It pertains to the pilot on the all-terrain vehicles in the South Nation area. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is, I'll read the motion first, and probably I'll give a little bit explanation. But Agriculture Rural Affairs Committee, ARAC, approved the addition of items for consideration by the committee at the November 23rd, 2017 ARAC, pursuant to Section 89.3 of the procedure bylaw, as the bylaw in question, temporary all-terrain vehicles and other vehicles, is going to expire prior to next ARAC meeting.
Sorry, so on the waiver rules to allow the item to stand. Gary, thanks. Gary.
Whereas the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee approved a bylaw on June 26, 2013, permitting the use of all-terrain vehicles, ATVs, on City of Ottawa roads and road allowances in Osgood Ward on trial basis by bylaw 2013-199, and whereas on November 25, 2015, Council approved an extension to the trial period and modification to the bylaw, and whereas the bylaw will expire on November 23, 2017, and to formalize the trial, staff must report back to ARAC with an evaluation of the pilot program, and whereas staff report will not be completed before the trial expires, yet staff and ward councillor support the continuation of the program on a temporary basis. Therefore, be resolved that the trial be extended until January 31st, 2019, prior to which time staff will provide an evaluation report to ARAC that will include a review of how the other rural municipalities have approached ATV use. Mr. Chair, this is coming as you know that back in 2013, ARAC entered with a pilot project with the ATV Club for allocating some road allowance and the permission for them to use the shoulder in Osgood Ward, and the delay has been happening because the club couldn't have funding issues, and so that it was extended last time, and right now, finally, the club, you and I think we went on a trip last year, and we used those trails, and we're not going to be able in 1 year to really assess the impact in the community and having full public talking to the resident and making sure that we're all on board. And me speaking with, working with the ATV club, I know they've been working very hard in building those trails, because there is a lots of challenge in building trails because we have a lots of rain and swamp area we have to avoid before we're able to build a trail. I think that will be a good extension for us working with the resident and the ATV club till January before we come to this committee with a full report and making a decision at that time on what we'd like to do.
Thank you very much. So on the extension of the pilot project?
Good.
Carried. Thank you. And this next item is actually something I'm going to move, so I'm going to pass the chair off to Councillor DeRuse, and then I'll move the motion.
Good.
Perfect.
Go ahead, Councillor.
So that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee approve the addition of this item for consideration by the committee at today's meeting, pursuant to Section 89.3 of the Procedure Bylaw, as the next ARAC meeting will not take place until February 2019. This is because the arena project is ongoing. We're expecting to be done in January, and we want to get this stuff approved before the next Agricultural Affairs Committee meeting. So,
on the motion?
On waiver?
On waiving the rules, sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. So again, the motion has to do with the funding of the Mantic Arena project from the community portion. So whereas the Mantic Arena is currently undergoing an expansion through a joint funding effort between the City of Ottawa, federal government, and the community through the Major Capital Partnership Program, and whereas the community funding portion comes through a number of fundraising efforts, including naming rights to various rooms within the expanded arena, and whereas the Georgina Falls Trust Fund was established to manage a bequest to Rideau Township from a resident for the purposes of funding improvements to the Mantic Arena at Centennial Park, and the trust should be considered community funds on that basis. And whereas the city's commemorative naming policy approved by council on July 24th, 2002, outlines the criteria and process for commemoratively naming municipal streets, parks, and facilities, or parts thereof. And whereas the results of the community's engagement on this file has resulted in the selection of names for several rooms requested through sponsorship that do not fit within the policy criteria. And whereas the commemorative naming policy provides an exemption allowing council to assign a commemorative name by resolution in keeping with its powers set out in the Municipal Act 2001. Therefore, be it resolved that the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee recommend that council approve $12,000 to be transferred from the Georgina Falls Trust Fund to the community's portion of the grant approved through the Major Capital Partnership Program. And be it further resolved, the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee recommend that council approve the naming of 2 dressing rooms after Jack Crawford and the Robinson and Goodfellow families, and 2 of the community rooms on the 2nd level after the Mantic Kiwanis and the Mantic Lions.
Thank you. On the motion?
So basically your
question
is to the chair. So you're switching funding basically. This is not a new funding.
There's no new money here. This is how they've always set out their plan to have money come from the Georgina Falls Trust Fund. The only way to get that access to those funds is to have council approval. That fund was established quite some time ago, and it has about a $68,000 base fund, and only the interest that is built on that, so right now that's $17,007, only the interest that's built on that can be directed to the Mantic Arena, and that's what this does. And then from the sponsorship, they're buying, essentially the idea is that they're buying it, but they would actually, because of the HST rules, they would actually lose funds. So we're just going to do it as a donation, and then we're going to take the donation directly towards the community portion, and then their desire with that donation is to have these rooms named in these people's honor.
Oh, I see. So that's one creative way we call it in the business to avoid the GST, basically.
It's also voodoo economics.
That's true.
I didn't say that, but
you didn't say that. Okay,
all right, thanks.
I'm good with that.
Any other question on the motion?
Does the council have access to the Paradise Papers too?
I think what Councillor Blair was saying, he was saying carried. I think that's all he said.
That's what I thought.
That's what you heard too? Perfect.
That's what I heard.
Good. All right,
carried.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, sure.
All right, so in-camera items, there are none. Information previously distributed. There was an update on the zoning bylaw amendment for 754 Bayview Drive. Open mic session, nobody here for that. Notice of motion, none. Inquiries, none. Other business, none. On adjournment? Okay, our next meeting will be Thursday, February 1st, 2018.